Warning: the material discussed in this show may be sensitive or a trigger for some listeners. Strong language and topics are discussed. We talk with active duty service members and practice OPSEC at all times. You have been warned.
The Bipolar DM, Jason Cottam. His show talks about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. Check us out right here on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, also on WLFE-DB.com, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. So take a seat, sit back, and get ready for the Bipolar DM.
Welcome to the Bipolar DM Show on WLFE-DB Radio. I am your host, Jason, the Bipolar DM, and this is a show about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. If you want to get a hold of us, you can reach us by email at thebipolardm@gmail.com. You can also visit our webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. We are available on Facebook as well. You can go to WLFE-DB Radio Network and find us there. Also on WLFE-DB Variety Unlimited. Our Facebook page for the show is also at Bipolar DM. That is the handle for that. And if you want more information, you can see us on Strim TV and also WLFE-DB.com. We're a proud supporter of Safe Space. If you're not familiar with Safe Space, this is a virtual safe space where you can come to if you're in crisis. We're not doctors, we're not psychiatrists, we're not here to solve your problems, but we are here to listen. And if you're in crisis or you're having a rough time, reach out to us, and we will get you hooked up with resources. If you go to WLFE-DB.com and click on the Safe Space button, there you'll get connected with several resources that are available. And coming up, we have want to also mention our Patreon. We are proud to have Patreon and Patreon supporters, especially our number one supporter, Siobhan. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to me, your monthly donation to help keep the radio show going. If you're interested in becoming a supporter of this network, of this show, please go to patreon.com/thebipolardm. There you're going to find several different levels of support. We have goodies available for each level. From buttons and stickers all the way up to T-shirts and hoodies. And so please check that out. In today's show, we are going to have Myles Sandoval on with us. Really excited about this, and let's go ahead and bring her on. Hello, how are you doing?
I am quite well. Thank you for asking. Excited to talk today.
Yes, very excited to talk with you, especially with what you have going on. Just kind of let everybody know that you are a doctor in physical therapy, and that you use Dungeons and Dragons in a therapeutic session in several different manners, not just with play therapy, but also helping those that are in recovery and other things. So let's go ahead and start off with just talking about your professional background. What is your professional background?
So you're absolutely right that I wear a lot of hats in that sense. Mm-hmm. And at the same time as my original training was as a physical therapist, at the same time, I had been active with the local meditation community and seen a lot of benefit there. And I had also been playing role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons for some time. And, you know, my little brain was scheming about ways to bring these things together or ways to better integrate these different aspects of what I was interested in, one, and two, what I very much believed could be beneficial to the right people. So, on a day to day basis, I offer recovery coaching to individuals who are either questioning their relationship with an addictive substance or behavior, or who have a history of an addictive substance or behavior use and are working towards recovery on their own path. But most people struggle to recover in isolation.
Yes,
And
and yeah,
yes,
recovery. Yeah, that is one of the natures of the beast. Is we those that are in recovery tend to isolate themselves, which is a very bad thing to do. When you're trying to do it alone, and so totally understand that. And so, how did you get? Well, first of all, how did you get into the professional field that you're in? You're in.
so it came from a variety of interests, and as well as connecting with other people like yourself who have similar passions and who also see the benefit in modalities like
Mm-hmm.
Dungeons and Dragons. I was actually working at a clinic where I was lucky enough that the director of rehabilitation there was also very passionate about Dungeons and Dragons. And
Oh,
so we both got trained by the nonprofit Game to Grow, which
yeah.
mainly focuses on using Dungeons and Dragons as part of, for example, social skills groups and other therapeutic modalities. And for that group, the intended audience is neurodiverse kids so that they have a place to connect with other kids in kind of a sandbox. A lot of times, these are the kids that don't have any friends and
Mm-hmm.
they don't know how to make friends. Not all of them, certainly, but Dungeons and Dragons becomes a wonderful play space where everybody shows up to the table and has a common goal already. And so, even if you didn't sit down at the table with friends, even if you sit down to a table with strangers, chances are you'll come away from that with a sense of camaraderie or even a sense of friendship. And so she saw a lot of benefit in that. And we were able to get our group off the ground. And now we have two and about to be three kids groups
Hmm.
where we play Dungeons and Dragons with a therapeutic bent.
Outstanding. Now, how does it look when you play Dungeons and Dragons in a therapeutic session? Does it look just like a regular game, or is it a little bit more directed?
I am glad you asked because there is a level of structure to something like a social skills group that you might or might not find in the typical Dungeons and Dragons session. I want to give that nod because I know a lot of DMs who put a lot of structure and a lot of thought into their games. And we put a lot of thought and a lot of structure into our games, and it just happens to be this certain way. So we start with a check in, which is basically a chance to see where everyone is starting emotionally speaking, because sometimes we might start a game and we're feeling calm or happy or interested. But sometimes, if the game's at the end of the day, as so many games are, you might be coming to the game feeling tired or irritated. So we have an opportunity for everyone to check in and kind of put their chips on the table with where they're at that particular point in time. And then we make sure that we set a goal for the session, which is, for example, really focusing on taking the perspective of other players or of the non-player characters. So we might have a timeout during the session where we talk about, how do you think that non-player character or NPC might feel if we stole from his shop while he wasn't looking.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it has a really nice quality about it in that it's not quite as direct as, telling someone that you shouldn't steal,
Mm.
um, or penalizing a child for an action that they've done in real life. because it is this imaginary world. And yet we can see into the thought processes behind the actions that the players choose for their characters, and kind of talk about, that's interesting. What are some other options for how we could get our gear to go adventuring? And it's a little bit gentler than asking about sensitive topics directly to the players.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the no-go topics that are pretty standard when you play, especially with children?
I like to say that we usually keep things PG rated. Mm-hmm. And depending on the age group, one of the adjustments that I do make is the ways that I talk about violence. So I tend to use the terminology, he's down, he's out of here, you guys took him out, instead of some of the more colorful language that people might use in an adult Dungeons and Dragons game to talk about, how they deal with the enemies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do notice. I was just watching just before we got on here some Dungeons and Dragons streaming, and it does get pretty graphic. They can when describing combat. That's part of the particular game they're playing with the audience that they're playing towards and the players they have. And but I am familiar with actually with the Kickstarter for Game to Grow, and I actually did participate in that. So I loved what they did with making Dungeons and Dragons in such a way that you can use it in therapy or in a play setting with direction, and extrapolating that towards working with adults and other people. It's been great seeing that, and I've talked to a lot of other doctors who use it in therapeutic settings. And let's get a little just step back a little bit and talk about your D&D background. How did you yourself get into Dungeons and Dragons?
Thank you for asking. So I was always fond of if anybody's old enough to remember kind of some of the old text-based role-playing games or RPGs. Mm-hmm. And that was a really nice foundation for a love of telling a great story together. And building on that, I was thinking about finding a Dungeons and Dragons group, and for a while not knowing how I might go about that. When I happened, because your friends might not be interested. A lot of my friends weren't interested, and where would you have the group, and who would DM when nobody knows how to DM? So all those sorts of questions came up and were the reason why I hadn't been playing in a group. When I was invited to a wonderful nonprofit called the Dallas Makerspace, where people help people who wants to create things. And they have all kinds of events, all kinds of groups. I was actually invited to a programming class, which didn't stick. I don't know how to program. That didn't work. But I saw on the calendar of events, hey, they have Dungeons and Dragons here. And so I walked in the first day kind of with my character sheet set up and ready to show up and play. And it ended up being such a great group that even after we had moved, we stayed connected to the same group. People are now very familiar with online play. Mm-hmm. And this was pre-pandemic, but it worked quite well. And it was really protective when we were moving to a place where we didn't know a lot of people. I knew that one day a week, I would be able to connect with people I knew and people I cared about, doing something that I loved.
That's great. Now stepping back forward, what are some of the benefits of playing Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, so that's a big question. That's a lot that we could list. But when I think about the main benefits of playing in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, I first think about the magic of semi-structured social time. Most people benefit from having some kind of social time in their lives, but it's hard to it can be hard to socialize as an adult, especially when different demographics kind of do different things to socialize. And it can be hard to step into one of those groups if, for example, you don't know how to play golf, or you're not a fan of fishing, which I know some people do as a social activity. Mm-hmm. Dungeons and Dragons provides enough structure that you kind of know what to do when you show up, even new players. And I would venture out and say that, as well as enough unstructured time that some sessions end up being a lot more about connecting with friends than about going anywhere in the story. And I think that's a fantastic session, right? Sometimes you need that spending an afternoon with friends. So we have semi-structured social time, and we have, with any luck, the consistency of the group, which I think a lot of us realized at the beginning of the pandemic, that these kind of circumstantial social groups that we had, coworkers, people that you see at your kids' soccer games, kind of other parents. These circumstantial social groups can actually be really protective. It's comforting to see the same, as long as you like them, it's comforting to see the same people week after week after week. And it can be an opportunity to build very real, very meaningful relationships. And I think we benefit from having these relationships. They become something that you can fall back on when things get challenging. And that way, when you have those relationships, it's not as hard to reach out for help from somebody you know as compared to somebody you don't know.
Right. Now, now when the pandemic struck, how was the transition from in-person groups to virtual groups? How did that come about?
We had to.
Yeah.
And we had to do it fast. I very much believe that if we lost our momentum, we could lose a lot. We could lose a lot of people. And fortunately, I had the experience of kind of porting into a physical game before. And I had the experience of connecting with people online, which is actually one of my preferred ways to connect with people. And so very quickly we started brainstorming, and we didn't miss a day. So I felt like that was a very important measure of consistency, was, what platform are we going to use? How are we going to connect with people? Do we, mail out physical dice so people can have that tactile stimulation? All right, let's do it. And there were certainly some growing pains of figuring out the best online system that was going to work for us, and figuring out how all this was going to work. But the consistency was very protective in getting that online very quickly in time for the pandemic.
Yeah, it was, the virtual tabletops and stuff like that fortunately did exist before the pandemic, which was a great boon, because they were ready. Well, they weren't ready. They kind of got caught off guard with the flood of people they got. And so, a lot of platforms like Roll20 and stuff like that had problems crashing until they picked up more servers, got more memory, stuff like that, so they handled the load. But lot of these things were already in place before the pandemic, and it became almost natural to make that transition. I know I did that myself from a physical game to a virtual game, using like Discord and D&D Beyond. And what are some of your preferred virtual platforms that you like to use when you do the virtual games?
So we use Zoom and Roll20, but we've talked about this a little bit. It's a little bit more happenstance than anything else. I know that a lot of people prefer Discord, and there's some alternative virtual tabletops. Heard good things about Owlbear Rodeo, among others. But a lot of people are familiar with Roll20, and a lot of people are familiar with Zoom. And so for a lot of new players, that ended up being a really nice way to get people playing right off the bat. They don't have to learn how to use a bunch of new systems. If they know how to use Zoom, they can see the tabletop and they can play. And that plug and play idea was what we really, really wanted for new players to be able to feel comfortable.
Yeah, and what's nice about the with Roll20 is that there's nothing to download. It's all on the server, on the web page. Unlike Fantasy Grounds and some of these other ones where you have to download something in order to play, that was the nice thing about Roll20 was that you don't have to. And also, with Zoom and Discord, the bandwidth, the feed, doesn't eat up your memory too on your computer, so it makes it makes it so that you can get more people on board and stuff like that without slowdown or lag or anything like that. And so I've been very impressed with how the virtual tabletops have really come into their own during this pandemic. Let's see, we're there. Okay. Other thing that I noticed as far as benefits to Dungeons and Dragons is that what's really great, especially with people that are in recovery or kids or stuff like that, is that it's a virtual place where there's no real world consequences, so that they can test out coping mechanisms, social skills, and things like that without real world consequences. So like your example where they go into a shop and they have the option, do we buy the stuff, or if we don't have the money, do we steal it? They can be able to debate and go through what the right or wrong, the morality of it. And also if they choose to steal, if they get caught, it doesn't affect them in real life, although in the game there is consequences. So they, learn about that. And so that's one thing that I've noticed, too, that's been great about using Dungeons & Dragons in a therapeutic matter.
Exactly. There's a layer of protection where, you can have, you can kind of experiment with parts of your identity that you may feel self-conscious about, or you may be unsure about. And you get that feedback in the game of like, wow, that really didn't go over well. Okay, that's good information. Or, hey, people like it when I let my funny side out, or when I joke around a little bit more. That's a useful piece of information too.
Yes, and that's what's so great about it is that. And I had another question that was right in the back of my mind, and it just went out there. So let's go ahead. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then when we're going to come back, we're going to talk a little bit more with what's some of the things that you're doing now, such as Roll for Recovery and working with the Phoenix. So let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
You're okay?
Welcome back. This is Jason, the Bipolar DM, and we're with Myles, who uses Dungeons and Dragons in several different therapeutic settings. And one of those that we're going to talk about is that for people that are in recovery. And let's start off with the group that you're working with, which is called the Phoenix. What is the Phoenix, and how did you get involved with them?
Thank you for asking. So I'm really proud to say that I work with the Phoenix. They are a nonprofit whose mission is to build sober, active community that fuels resilience and harnesses the transformational power of connection. And the whole idea that I break it down to is we're here to help people have or learn how to have fun without the influence of addictive substances or behaviors. And I can't think of a better way to have fun besides Dungeons and Dragons, which I know that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But in addition to the Dungeons and Dragons campaign that we have going, the kind of the meat and potatoes of Phoenix events, which are both available online as well as in person in a growing number of states and Canada. Cool. Is yoga, CrossFit, dance fitness, hiking, going for mountain bike rides. They've got all kinds of activities. I've been kayaking with the Phoenix, both online and in person. And I believe that you'll be putting the links in the end, which we'll talk about at the end.
Yeah, I'll need the one link I didn't have is the Phoenix's link, so I need to put that up there real quick. Do you happen to know off the top of your head the Phoenix's website?
I do. We can do this at the end.
Okay, no problem. Let's see. And what's great about the Phoenix, that from what I'm just getting involved with them now, is that they provide social events to help you. I hate to say eat up time, but when you're in recovery and you're trying to avoid your old habits and your old haunts and stuff like that, you turn out having a lot of time on your hands, and unfortunately, that can be very detrimental, especially when you get trapped in your own head and your own mind, and and start ruminating about your previous lifestyle, your previous choices, and what's so great about Phoenix is that they get you out of that, whether virtually or in person. They get you connected socially with other people, and they help you, use your time more constructively and more beneficially. I think that's one thing that I've really been impressed with what they're doing.
I want to say thank you to you as well for coming on board as one of our DMs. We wouldn't be able to reach as many players if it weren't for having more than one DM to meet those players, and especially the new players. I know that they're very grateful for having the opportunity to play and getting immersed in that story right away. So thank you for being a part of the Phoenix.
And that's a perfect transition into Roll for Recovery. What is Roll for Recovery?
Roll for Recovery is the Phoenix role-playing games club. And I make sure to call it the role-playing games or RPG club because in the future, I've got big plans about multiple
we're talk
DMs.
about that too.
Yes, and I wanted to leave the door open for playing other types of RPGs. I don't know if you've heard of Wanderhome.
No.
What is
that one?
Yeah, it's an RPG that I just find really, really interesting right now, and it's DM agnostic, so it can be played with or without a DM. And you're in a world full of animal people that farm buggy or insect livestock. And it's just a very pastoral Redwall without the the epic wars between different animal tribes. A really nice way just to get out of your head and farm some bumblebees for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a little bit off track, which I apologize because I
No,
get
it's
on
okay.
tangents quite frequently.
No,
But
that's perfect. Yeah, go on. Go on.
yeah, so right now, Roll for Recovery is consists of two and very soon to be three Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that are open to both new and experienced players. And the whole idea is for players to come in and be able to get immersed in the story from day one. We meet virtually for an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we've had a great reception so far. We launched at the beginning of August, and our Facebook group has, I think, 53 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a lot of interest, and my only hope and concern is making sure we have enough DMs on board to support that.
Yes, I know that from my own groups. Try to get my own programs going. That sometimes the demand outpaces what you have in resources, and so it is. It can be a challenge trying to keep up with because you don't want anybody left behind. That's always been my biggest worry, especially with what I'm doing with Dungeons and Dog Tags, is that. Of people getting left behind or falling out because we don't have a game for them to be in, and so it's been great. So you've said that the reception's been really good. How how does that look as far as how many players you got coming in, or did you have like way too many players? I mean, how was that?
So you read my mind basically. At the beginning, we had a good amount of interest because I wanted to make sure that we had players who showed up. So I posted it in several areas. Mm-hmm. And for a while, we were a big bustling group. I think we had 10 to 12 players at once.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yes, and there was a lot of kind of new player interest. People were getting a feel for it, kind of feeling it out. And some players ultimately decided that, Dungeons and Dragons wasn't for them, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. But we ended up with a solid group of about 8 players, give or take. People miss weeks at times. But we ended up with a really solid group of 8 players in our group. And I know that your campaign is finding its consistent group who's going to make their way through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we have, right now we got 3 great players. 2 of them are in Vietnam, all veterans. I run a veterans-only group, so in there, just because, not to take away from what you're doing, but or anything like that, but we have our own culture as veterans. We have our own way of talking. A lot of F words is involved. We have, we can use the F bomb in 27 different ways and with different meanings. But we have that camaraderie, being veterans and having served and stuff like that. And so it has been great being a part of the Phoenix and having that going, especially helping out veterans who are in recovery, because for a lot of us, we tend to self-medicate and isolate ourselves, when we have problems going on, and it's very difficult for a lot of times for us. It's gotten better, but it's still been very difficult for us to reach out, especially with the stigma of mental illness and addiction. And so I've been very, very happy with how things have been going with the Phoenix and with working with Roll for Recovery. It's been great, and I'm really happy that you have another DM that's coming along, about ready to start another game, and that we're poised for another growth spurt. And it's been a wild ride. Been enjoying every bit of it.
I'm really glad to hear that, and in no way is your campaign kind of taking away from the mission. I feel like it really augments the Phoenix mission as well as that of our little RPG club, because the veteran population is not one that I can connect to in that way. I can connect to often folks working in the healthcare field. I connect easily with last responders. I did that for a long time. That was my first career, but I can't connect to the veteran or active duty population in the same way. So I'm really, really grateful that we have you on board to be able to connect to that population.
Yeah, and I've been very happy to do it too. I got a lot of time on my hands, and so it helps me greatly to be able to host these games and to have something to look forward to each week. And the guys that I'm working with right now are all fantastic. We've been having a blast with our campaign. Looking forward to picking up some more players too. We're working on that. But how does Dungeons and Dragons help in sober living?
So that is an excellent question. And it goes back to some of the benefits that we talked about earlier, but also it stands in its own right. You touched briefly on how important it is to have something to look forward to. A lot of folks make their way through the week thinking about the weekend, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most common activities to do on the weekend is drinking. It's asking a lot to ask people to take something out of their lives without replacing it with something else. And I love Dungeons and Dragons because it is something that you can look forward to. And it is something that you can spend as much time as you want preparing for. Sometimes we'll have our kids in the kids campaign, we'll ask them to draw their character from one week to the next, or ask them to make something from Hero's Feast and take a picture, the Dungeons and Dragons cookbook, to see how it turns out. And you can spend as much time as you want immersed in a very colorful, very imaginative world of character development, of world creation. And it can be incredibly beneficial in a day and age when a lot of what people do is consumptive. So the average person does a lot of consuming media and not necessarily a lot of skills or activities that involve creative generation. And that's really concerning to me, because I know that when I do a lot of media consumption to the point where it becomes out of balance, it almost feels like my creativity button is broken for a minute. And there's such possibility when we're thinking in that creative space. And when we do that with other people, it almost comes together like magic in a way that's hard to describe. But players can build off other players, as well as building each other up. And last but not least, you get the camaraderie aspect of we're doing this together. That's so protective.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I do love about that, the creative aspect, but also the social aspect too, and the connections that you make with other people, especially when you have a common enemy or common foe or common task that you're working together to overcome. And one of the things I love about Dungeons and Dragons, it's not a competitive game, it's a collaborative game. So you're not trying to beat the dungeon master. You're not trying to beat the other players. What it is you're having to work together in order to solve a problem that you cannot do on your own, or if you do, it'd be very difficult to do on your own.
Most definitely.
So, kind of going back a little bit on your experience with Dungeons and Dragons, is fifth edition the only only version that you've played with, or have you played with other versions of Dungeons and Dragons?
So fifth edition is the only version that I have played, regrettably. Um, Although I hear a lot of good things about 3.5. And my husband has experience playing 3.5, which he's quite fond of. So it might be worth a try in the future.
Yes, especially with it's very numbers heavy, with that, and I think that's one thing people like, especially with the combat aspect, because it kind of is more a throwback to the original Dungeons and Dragons, which Dungeons and Dragons, when it first started, was a war game. From working with miniatures and large unit tactics, and Gary Gygax and his friends had developed the small unit tactics where you're working with individual characters in a fantasy setting, but they still had that flavor and a lot of the dice rolls based on the war tactics that were before. And with fifth edition went away quite a bit from the combat and went more towards the role playing, and I think that's what has made it a lot more easier for new players to get involved, because there's not a lot of numbers and math that they have to know. And it's more intuitive and natural. And I think that's one of the benefits of fifth edition has been how easy it is for new players just to jump in and play. Without having to know what they're doing. They just, you mentioned before how easy it is to get new players in. And so how do you bring new players along? What's your preferred way of doing that?
I'm glad you asked, because I really do prefer to meet with people beforehand, kind of a mini session zero, right? Mm-hmm. And I get a feel for what people's experience is, because there are some other role-playing games that are quite similar to Dungeons and Dragons, and people really pick up the rules quite quickly when they've played other role-playing games, depending on what that game is. But I always try to make sure that somebody feels really comfortable with the basic mechanics and comfortable with their character. Sometimes I encounter new players who feel like their character has to be exactly like them, has to be a reflection of them. And I love getting a little bit, I love when players get a little bit bendy with their characters and maybe play a character who's totally unlike them.
Yeah.
And, well, it might not be the easiest for a first-time player to kind of pick up. I always want people to know that it's a very open-ended world. There are a few things that you can do wrong. And if you're having a good time and telling a good story together, then it's working out well. So I'd like to take 15 or 30 minutes to get folks comfortable with the basic game mechanics and comfortable with their character. And that way they're usually ready to show up on for the campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and other things I like doing too, especially with new players, is having them watch games, such as on Critical Role or Acquisitions Incorporated or any of the other many games out there that are live streamed, because that way they can see kind of how the game looks and how it flows. And it takes some of the mystery out of it too, and some of the anxiety that might be associated with trying something brand new. And so when they come into it, they have a general idea about how the game's supposed to look and how it's supposed to flow. And so I really love with this fifth edition and soon to come 5.5, or however Wizards of the Coast is going to do this in 2 years, bringing in new players and how intuitive the game is, and I do like how you do it, where you bring in like a session zero with the new player and get them oriented to the character sheet and role playing and some of the basic mechanics that they're going to need to know. What are some of the future plans? You mentioned, yeah, we're going to talk about this, the future plans for Roll for Recovery. You talked a little bit about that.
I have plans in my head that may or may not ever come to fruition, but I would really, really love to bring some more DMs on board so that we can serve more players. A lot of people kind of immediately see the value in Dungeons and Dragons for this community, and I want to be able to meet that desire to play. And kind of like you mentioned earlier, you never want to have to turn a player away because you're like, sorry, I don't have any room in my games. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm working on bringing another DM on board so that we can have that space. But I would love to bring more DMs on board during the time that we have. I would love to expand to another night. I would love to hold an in-person Roll for Recovery when the time is right. It's been a little bit touch and go with the pandemic, but I've got some big plans coming down the road. We'll see what happens.
Well, that's great. And with the with the number of players that you have at your table, you mentioned you had as many as 10, which is a lot for a Dungeons and Dragons game. What's kind of the more ideal number that you want to be able to get down to so that you have enough players at the table, but also not so many that people get left out or you don't get very much done because there's so many people taking turns?
I think 4 to 6 players is a really nice number. And it's a personal opinion, but I feel like that gives enough time that everybody feels like they have a voice and players don't get disengaged before it's their turn again. Yeah,
that's totally what I find too. Is I like between 4 and 6 players. 6 is my max typically, because I find that once you get more than 6 players, then the game kind of gets bogged down a little bit and people get disengaged unless the storyline's really good. But they have a chance to become more disengaged because they're waiting for their turn to come around and it's taking a while because you got more people in the game. And so I do like having that smaller number because also too the social aspect goes up too. So you have a better chance or better opportunities, I would say, to engage with the other players too, and to get to know them. And having 8-10 players, that's a lot of people to try and get to know at the table. But I do like the idea of between 4 and 6 or so players, which I think is more the ideal, especially playing online. But let's see. I kind of ate up all my questions, but is there anything you want? Let's go ahead and bring up the Phoenix's webpage if you want to bring that up, or tell me what that is, and I can pull that up.
I will send that to you on Facebook Messenger if that is all right.
Yes, that'd be great. Here we go. Getting it now. All right. Phoenix.org. Okay, good. They have a straight.
And I would love to see viewers in the room on Tuesday. We can always have spectators for new players that want to get acquainted to the game and get their bearings, like you mentioned, which is so beneficial.
Yes. Yeah, that's also great too. Is that with the with that is getting to have the opportunity people just to watch, which is something not a lot of people are not aware of, that they could just sit in and watch a game too if they want to without participating. And I think that's great that you provide that opportunity too, so that they feel more comfortable jumping in or staying in the background. But I like that, how you do that, where you allow people to just come in and watch the game as well.
It can be kind of nerve-wracking to not know what you're getting yourself into. and to feel like you have to jump into it with 2 feet. I can definitely see how watching can be a nice way to figure out if it's something that you want to do in the first place. And we've had some spectators like that where they don't know what Dungeons and Dragons is. Maybe they've heard about it. Maybe they have a family member who plays, and they watch, get a feel for what it is, and decide that it's not for them, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and I like that that gives a soft sell, I would like to call it, instead of a hard sell on getting people involved in the game. And how many people you figure you get that you just watch the game end up coming in and playing versus those that say, "Oh, this is not for me"?
So we've had a number of spectators, and we've had a couple people that want to be spectators and watch it kind of like Critical Role. But we've also had a couple players who spectated for a couple sessions and then asked me in between sessions, "Hey, can I play this week?" And I always want to be able to say, of course, which is one of the reasons why, we've been finding that balance of having enough DMs for the players that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, and how is that recruitment going for them? What's the best? If somebody's a dungeon master and like to get involved, what would be the best way for them to do it? Would that just go to the Phoenix's website, or is there a better way to get a hold of you?
The best way is to get in contact with me directly, which you can do at my website.
Oh, I got that, Dr. Myles, right here. There we go. So, yes, there's your website right there, and that's a great way to get a hold of you if you are a player or a dungeon master wanting to get involved. Now, for fair disclosure, even if you're a dungeon master and ready to go, you can't just jump right into it. There's a couple hoops you got to jump through. And why don't we discuss that real quick, some of the things that, working with the Phoenix that they need to do before they're able to host a game.
So one of the things that makes the Phoenix really special, in my opinion, is that all activities are designed to be fun, but also emotionally and physically safe and supportive, inclusive, and accessible. And there's a couple trainings that we ask new volunteers to go through just to make sure that they are acquainted with kind of that frame of mind for running the game. Just because, you can have a bad experience with Dungeons and Dragons, and it's something that can happen, but we work really, really hard to minimize the likelihood of that happen, of running into a triggering situation in the game and having that ruin your game experience, by making sure that the DMs are aware of looking at things through that lens. And if I recall correctly, it's a 2-hour training. It's online. And then you touch base with one of the volunteer coordinators, and then you're good to go. So I would love to hear from DMs who are interested in DMing for a good cause. This is a great one.
And if memory serves me correct, there's also a background check too. Is that correct?
If I recall correctly, yes.
Yes. So, and that's of course for the safety of the players that are getting involved. As far as I know, I don't think there's anything saying if you got something on your record, it's going to keep you from doing it, but they kind of need to know who they're bringing in to run these games. And so there is a background check involved as well, at no cost, of course. But they do a very thorough checking and vetting process with the Phoenix, which is one thing I was very impressed with, was how they do their vetting process and their training too, with getting, knowing the principles of the Phoenix, some of the background information about the history of the organization and what they do and what they don't do, and stuff like that. And so there's some There are some rules before coming into the game, such as, was it 48 hours of sobriety?
Yep. So
Is one of them?
Yep. All Phoenix events are free to enter, which is one of the fantastic things about the Phoenix. And the ticket that gets you in the door is 48 hours of continuous sobriety.
Yeah. So, and that doesn't necessarily say, if you haven't done the 48 hours, no, you can't do it. You just got to wait until next week or whenever the next event is. But that gives you something to stay sober for. And I think that's what's really great about it, is that it gives you something that, all right, I'm going to not pick up that drink or pick up that needle because I got something to look forward to. Instead of, just debating within yourself, the right or wrong of it, you actually have something tangible that you're looking forward to that helps keep you clean and sober. So let's see. All right. Thank you so much, Myles, for coming on. We're going to go ahead and tie this up, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing, especially with those, not only those in recovery, but with kids as well. Is there anything, parting words you'd like to share with us before we let you go?
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to seeing some of the viewers on Tuesday nights.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back room for just a minute while I close this up. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Bipolar DM Show. I am your host, Jason. This is a WLFE-DB radio, and I'm really proud to be part of it. If you want to watch us, we're live on Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on WLFE-DB.com. You can find us on Strim TV as well under the Variety Unlimited channel at the same time. And, of course, you can go to Facebook and find us at Bipolar DM, or do a search on YouTube for the Bipolar DM. And we're on Twitch TV as well. So it's twitch.tv/The Bipolar DM. So those are some of the places you can find us. Again, if you want to get a hold of us, our email is thebipolardm@gmail.com, or go to our webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. There you'll find previous episodes of my podcast, links to my live shows, as well as resources on indie writing, Dungeons & Dragons, and mental health. Let's see. Next week, we don't have a list yet as far as what we got going on next week, but we will have a show next week. And I'm working on finding a guest for that. But if you'd like to be a guest on our show, please reach out to me at thebipolardm@gmail.com. And thank you again for tuning in to the Bipolar DM Show. I am Jason. And remember, everybody, take your meds.
Thank you for listening to the Bipolar DM. They love sharing thoughts and ideas. See you next week, 7 p.m. Saturdays on WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows, and that makes for great talk radio. WLFE Digital Broadcast Network is on TV. You can watch all of our shows on WLFE-DB.com. Check out our channels: Paranormal View for all of your paranormal type shows, LGBTQ Friends for all of our LGBTQ shows, Variety Unlimited for all other shows. It runs 24/7 right on WLFE-DB.com. You'll even catch the lives, all in one place. Never miss an episode, past or future. WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.